There appears to be more of an upper airway disease and a lower airway disease. That's good for most Americans. The one group that may be a problem for is very young kids, very young children, toddlers, who have trouble with upper airway infections. And you're in fact seeing more flu-like infections and bronchiolitis in New York City among children. So that could be a challenge for young kids, and we are seeing rising hospitalizations among that pediatric segment.
A lot of our toddlers have, certainly been admitted with those kinds of symptoms. And even before, COVID, a lot of the viruses started off as upper, airway viruses, but then sometimes could still lead into lower airway. But, again, our toddlers are unvaccinated, so they're extremely vulnerable.
Thank God.
In New York City, nearly a third of EMS workers are on medical leave because of COVID. The remaining EMS staff are under orders not to transport stable patients to the hospital with only flu-like symptoms and no fever. Many children across the country head back to classrooms this week, while their parents are bracing for shutdowns driven by outbreaks of COVID among students and staff. In New York City, the teachers union had asked to go remote to cope with all these staffing problems, but the new mayor, Eric Adams, says he feels strongly schools must remain open. CNN's Polo Sandoval has more from New York.
Christina Laura, after adapting to this COVID era, you have students and staff across the country that are going to begin to return to class after their holiday break. There are some school systems that are taking a more aggressive approach. For example,
there's no way in hell that I want to integrate these COVID-19 shots into my life.
DC students and staff will have to have a negative COVID test before they're allowed back to school. And then here's how the nation's largest school system is going to handle this. Of course, we're talking New York City. Rather than sending an entire classroom that's been potentially exposed to COVID home, what they're going to be doing, they'll be distributing at-home tests to students and staff who have symptoms or possibly been exposed to a COVID-positive person. Now, kids who are asymptomatic or test negative will be allowed to continue at school. Kids with symptoms may not attend school until they receive 2 negative tests taken 24 hours apart. And as for those kids and staff members who test positive, they'll have to isolate at home for 10 days. The whole effort here at the point is to try to limit disruptions and allow those healthy students to remain in class. So we heard from the Secretary of Education on CBS, basically urging schools to remain open this spring semester.
We recognize that there may be some bumps in the road, especially this upcoming week.
I feel like that scene from Chevy Chase where
short-term or
vacation, he's talking to his kid
most likely based off of staffing issues, and ultimately those are safety issues when you don't have adequate staff. But the goal is full-time in-person learning for our students. They've suffered enough.
Like, yeah, but does he model by it? Does he kiss his kid like this big gigantic long story?
Receiving calls from some schools announcing that 5 to 10% of their staff will be unavailable.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest questions right now, is whether kids are going to school this week, how they're going to school this week, and whether there are enough teachers to handle it. Look, rapid COVID tests are being handed out to teachers and staff in Massachusetts. The state's largest teacher union called for all schools to be closed to give time for testing. Some will delay reopening, but most will remain open.
About themselves, and I think they got it.
I think we're one of the few states in the whole country that's been able to supply both masks and test kits in advance of returning back to school. We're trying to use every mitigation strategy we can to have a good outcome in our schools. And so this is an important day for us.
And important news for kids here. The Food and Drug Administration could greenlight Pfizer's COVID-19 booster shots for children between the ages of 12 and 15. That would happen as early as today. COVID concerns are reshaping spring semester plans at more than 30 colleges and universities. Yeah, Goldman Sachs told its employees to work remotely for at least the next 2 weeks just to get through this influx of cases. JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup also say their U.S. employees can start the new year working remotely. And then there's this. Cast and crew of the Broadway musical Mrs. Doubtfire are being asked to take a 9-week, get this, unpaid hiatus starting next week. The hope is that that will help keep the show financially afloat as audiences concerned about COVID stay home. All right, work and school are on hold for a lot of Americans as travel delays mount across the country. Take a look. More than 17,000 flight cancellations since Christmas Eve, peaking this weekend as thousands of people tried to fly back home.
Coronavirus, not the full-blown COVID-19.
Too long,
Symptoms
and there is no space to spend the time and something to eat, so it's a long time here.
Last year, I was traveling. There was
want to see their family. They are moving around, and travel has really picked up to pre-pandemic levels just before Christmas. That collided with Omicron-driven staff shortages, airline staff shortages, and weather delays. Just a total mess. Just canceled across the board on those arrival and departure boards. CNN's Brian Young has more.
Good morning, Laura and Christine, and Happy New Year. Of course, everyone wants to get the New Year off to a great start. When you think about all the canceled flights, it's really having an impact across the country. We talked to so many travelers who were frustrated, as you can understand, about trying to get home. Take a look at some of this video from the inside, and there were long lines throughout the airport. That's doubled up from across the country for people trying to get home, especially to start work on Monday morning. Talked to one family of 7 who had their flight canceled 3 times, and another couple who was just hoping to get home. Now, on top of all this, you got to think more than 2,500 flights were canceled on Sunday. More than 2,700 flights canceled on Saturday. You put that recipe together, and you can understand why this family that we talked to was very frustrated.
Yesterday in the night, coming in here, so for the checking my flight, so the lady told me, yeah, security, they canceled the flight. So what happened? Why? Not have the business there, so only change the flight for 2 days, 7 days, not have more solution.
Look, we've been dealing with this pandemic for quite some time. One of the things that we noticed in the airport, people were wearing the mask. They understood why they needed to have some distance as they went through the security checkpoints. But at the same time, when you look at the big board, especially with flights going to the West Coast, you saw a canceled flight could have a ripple effect, especially for families trying to get across the country.
Brian Young, thank you for that. Meantime, supply chain delays are now slowing down medical supplies up to 37 days at U.S. ports. Between 8,000 and 12,000 shipping containers with medical supplies are essentially stuck right now because all the congestion through the transportation system. This latest data from the Health Industry Distributors Association reports recent shipments won't be delivered until at least February. All right, it is the new year. That always brings new laws on the books, and workers in 25 states have a reason to celebrate this new year, an increase in the minimum wage. It took effect Saturday in 21 states, with increases ranging from cents to dollars per hour. For the 8 states you see there in red, including New York and California, the raises are aimed at phasing in a $15 minimum wage in years to come. Before you see there in yellow, including Michigan and Virginia, they're taking a step toward a $12 minimum wage. For the 9 in green, including Ohio and Colorado, those are automatic cost of living adjustments based on inflation. And in the remaining 4 in blue, the raises take effect later this year. Meanwhile, the federal minimum wage is still stuck at $7.25 an hour. It hasn't moved since 2009. That's the longest American workers have gone without an increase in the federal wage since the creation of it back in 1938. President Biden and some progressive Democrats have pushed for a $15 federal minimum. But last February, the Senate parliamentarian ruled against including a minimum wage increase in that COVID relief bill. Many of the workers will see increases because their employers raised the pay floor, some after prolonged labor disputes. If you remember, Striketober, the tight labor market we're in has prompted many companies to hike wages, hoping to lure and retain hourly workers. And that is the free market at work for when you have companies who know to survive they've got to pay more. But again and again, these states, it is voters in these states, when asked about a higher minimum wage, they're voting yes, and you're seeing it phased in here in so many of these places. Giving the people what they want.
I've seen 15,
Right,
they
so
want 15, and then they end up getting nothing constantly.
Of the season, more than 14 million people under winter
nothing.
storm watches and warnings this morning. We'll tell you how much snow is on the way next.
But you know, in the United States, the states make up their own. The states make up their own lowest employment wage, minimum wage. Antonio Brown lost $1 million or something.
That outburst, and again, you know, I'm a fan of his skill, I'm a fan of his talent, I'm not a fan of the distraction, and I worry that there's something bigger happening here. Todd, your thoughts?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. There is something bigger happening here. This is a part of a pattern. We've seen this play out multiple times, multiple teams. You know, in the NFL, it always seems talent finds its way back on onto the field regardless of behavior and regardless of extracurricular activities. I truly don't know if in this instance it will, because, again, as you heard Coach Bruce Arians of the Bucs say he quit on us, that doesn't seem to do very well in NFL locker rooms. But again, we will see. It was a bizarre incident. If he is going through a mental health situation, we certainly wish that he gets the help that he does need, because nobody needs to see that. With that, time now 12 minutes after the hour. Still ahead on Fox and Friends First, Joe Concha, Congressman Pat Fallon, and Wesley Hunt all join us live. Plus, we're getting more mixed messages from the White House.
The PCR test after infection can be positive for up to 12 weeks. So that is not going to be
I
helpful.
thought Fox and Friends had to have one woman on
At
there.
that time, I myself feel that that's a reasonable thing to do. Yeah, but if the experts can't get their facts straight, how are the American people supposed to follow the guidelines? That's next.
They're about more likable with beautiful.
8 inches of snow may have helped hell freeze over. The blaze more than 60% contained, but it's complicating the aftermath for both residents and investigators, still trying to find any sign of 2 missing people.
We're actively working the scenes with dogs. The scenes are still hot. We're still deep in debris, hot debris, covered with snow. So it's a very difficult task.
The most destructive fire in state history, still feared to be deadly.
Our thanks to Emily Alcada for that report. All 21 passengers that were stuck midair overnight in 2 tram cars in New Mexico have been rescued. Crews used ropes and helicopters to bring everyone to safety on Saturday. The incident occurred on the Sandia Pig Tramway on New Year's Eve as employees at a mountaintop restaurant were going home after finishing their shift. Officials say the tram stopped midway. Yikes, as there was an unusually fast accumulation of ice on one of the cables. We'll hear more from one of the rescued employees coming up a little bit later on Morning Joe. A massive sewage spill in Southern California forced several beach closures over the holiday weekend. Officials say more than 8 million gallons of sewage spilled into the neighborhood of Carson, which is south of Los Angeles, Friday night, where it then flowed into a storm drain and into channels leading to the ocean. Sanitation agency personnel say deteriorating concrete and the recent rainstorms in the area caused the pipe to collapse. This comes after an estimated 25,000 gallons of crude oil spilled into the Pacific Ocean back in October, forcing some of the same beach closures. Meanwhile, New York City Mayor Eric Adams has taken his promise to crack down on crime into his own hands. Just hours into his first day as New York City Mayor, Adams called 911 after witnessing an assault in progress. Spring into action. The New York Post reports 2 squad cars arrived to the scene minutes later. The men involved were getting into their own vehicles. Police left without speaking to anyone involved. Adams, a former NYPD officer for more than 20 years, made safety a central message in his campaign. He was sworn in at midnight on New Year's Day in Times Square, receiving a ceremony there, and he will also be a guest coming up a little later on Morning Joe. Still ahead, a mid-game meltdown for one of Tampa Bay's top receivers. Where Antonio Brown's future on the team and perhaps the league stands this morning. Sports next.
I'm surprising my team with a pretty good latest sleeper job because I can answer any question about any issue, but I'm stunned when it comes to payroll.
You do QuickBooks, how to easily run payroll.
Jeremy Pascal flew off the edge of a cliff at Lake Tahoe. So he lands deep in that powder, upside down, with his head buried in the snow. Then he doesn't move. Gold and another friend, Duke Arnold, acted quickly here and rushed down to dig him out. After 53 seconds of terror, Christine, it all ends well. Yeah, you know, when I do those kind of jumps, I always think you gotta land not in too much powder, or let me just tell you, I will not be the one to dig you out because I am not the one to do that jump. But I love those guys. So, all right, the public may not believe it yet, but the economy roared back to life in 2020. 2021, what could stand in the way of growth in 2022?
Research scientist and California father of two, doctor.
These are just more news messages.
You can't get on the same page as to whether or not you should test or not, something as seemingly straightforward as that. How can we trust the administration and its messaging on bigger issues like vaccines and other major health issues?
Yeah, well, thanks, Todd. Look, that's been a consistent problem with the messaging almost since the pandemic began, but in recent months it's gotten a little bit worse. The administration really needs to understand that this is a critical public health issue, and as a result, it can't be going and just making up policies on the fly based on opinion. At this point, we're 2 years into the pandemic. We don't have to guess what's going on. We now know, based on a huge, enormous body of literature and medical evidence, everything from how this transmits to testing, to masking, to vaccinations, to everything in between. And so when it comes to this kind of policy, right, let alone any policy, they need to base their decisions and their policies very cautiously, very deliberately, and entirely based on the clinical evidence rather than saying, my opinion is, etc. And as a result of that, what's happening is there's quite a bit of confusion created in the public, and that confusion simply leads to lack of confidence in what the administration is saying, and that lack of confidence turns into lack of compliance. And when we have that, you lose control of the pandemic, and that's what's happened over the last year or so especially. And so I think what we really need is for the administration to recognize that they need to speak with one voice, and that one voice needs to be consistent and based entirely on clinical evidence, not based on politics, not based on internal opinion, and not based on anything else aside from what the actual medical science has to say.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that we're all throwing our hands up in the air with literally the two people that the nation turns to for answers on this, Fauci and Walensky, are at cross purposes. It doesn't make any sense. You are based in LA, want to get your thoughts on this. LA County planning to force kids to wear N95 or surgical masks as the FDA gets ready to greenlight Pfizer COVID-19 booster for kids age 12 to 15 today. Let's start with the masks. As a parent, is it reasonable to expect your kid to sit there with a tight-fitting mask in school for 8 hours a day?
So here's what's interesting. Over the holidays, the word that this directive was going to come out leaked out, and there was an enormous amount of parental outrage on social media that resulted in bombardment of the LA County public health officials by emails from parents who were concerned about this, who weren't just concerned, who were angry
if like a mayor
for a couple of reasons. Right, number one is if you're telling kids and families now that they need to switch into much more draconian measures in terms of masks, switching to N95s or surgical masks that are tight-fitting, does that mean that those cloth masks that they've been wearing or those cheap disposable masks haven't been working? It's an implicit acknowledgement of that. Second, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's very tough to breathe with those masks, even if you've ever worn one. It's very difficult to wear one that's tight-fitting for a matter of minutes or even hours, let alone an entire school day. And finally, the Omicron variant is a lot less severe. So why make the mask requirements more severe in response to it? So what happened is the public health department decided to make that a recommendation for kids, not a mandate. They are still mandating it for teachers and other school staff and employees starting very soon. So that directive just came out the other day. So we're going to see, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the part of parents to say, let's base this in the science rather than just trying to do anything you can to show an abundance of caution. That's all the theatrics.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be great if we focus on the science? I know every time I have to wear one of those masks for any period of time, I got to use my inhaler just because I am not breathing well with those masks on. Do what you got to do. Dr. Human Hamadi, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you, sir. Kevin, over to you.
Great conversation. Gentlemen, thank you. Time now, 21 minutes after the hour, as we continue on Fox and Friends First. More tough talk from President Biden in his latest conversation with the president of Ukraine. Whether the U.S. is doing enough to deter Russian aggression has proven, apparently, plans for a possible invasion. That plus this, remember?
I'll put in place a plan to deal with this pandemic responsibly. I've already done it.
A bit of a change in tune right there. Congressional candidate and Army veteran Wesley Hunt calling out the president's mixed messaging and broken promises to Americans. He joins us after this.
It's not mixed messaging. Oh my God. I don't understand why these people don't understand that you can handle the pandemic two different ways. Like China and shut everything down from the very beginning. Or like the US did and wait and do things piecemeal. And so in the very beginning, Joe Biden told Trump that there needs to be a federal response. Everybody needs to get on the same page and do the same kind of thing and shut it all down. And now he's saying there is no federal solution to this, which I think he's probably right on both accounts. He needed to shut it down in like January 2020 to really get ahead of this and to not feel anything coming. And now at this point, first of all, it doesn't really matter what he says, because the federal government probably does not have the jurisdiction to make states do certain things. And governors are in control there, and they can veto it and do what they want. And they'll stand up to the president. They'll wind up in the courts or whatever. And sometimes the states win those, and the governors and stuff. So that's where it would probably end up. They were talking about that when Trump was in office too. That if he were to mandate something for all 50 states, then somebody could challenge it and say it's overreaching and it's violates the states' rights and state constitution and stuff like that. And then probably could go to the state Supreme Court and go to the big federal Supreme Court too, if they would look at it. So I just think that ship has sailed, to get ahead of it, obviously, since it's falling on the whole country now. Unless the whole entire country wants to shut down all at once, like the states. And, I don't know if that was doing it kind of late, probably wasn't the solution. But they might act like it was, because now they don't want to do it again. But it wasn't long enough, I don't think. And they didn't have the vaccines back then either, I don't think. Not like they do now. For what it's worth. The little guys on TV. The guys on this show, constantly. I know the commercial, all three.
Good Monday morning, everyone. Happy New Year. This is Early Start. I'm Laura Garrett, and I'm Christine Romans. The first Monday in 2022. Wow. Gotta write that on your checks, right? I guess do we write checks anymore? No. 5:30 in the East. Time for our top stories to keep an eye on today. The vacation is over. Tens of millions of Americans head back to work and school today in the face of Omicron. That includes more than 1 million students in New York City. More in a moment.
Teachers told him to stand down. Teachers told him to go home. And he failed to do so. It's hard to imagine a more significant and more serious dereliction of duty.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney says the January 6th Select Committee has first-hand information now that Ivanka Trump urged her father to intervene that day as his supporters attacked the Capitol. Chairman Benny Thompson also suggested members of Congress assisted the rioters that day, though to varying degrees. Snow on the way for the South, Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast today. 14 million people under winter storm watches and warnings. 2 people are still missing from that Marshall fire in Boulder County, Colorado. President Biden has now issued a major disaster declaration for the area devastated by wildfires last week and now covered with snow. A report from Colorado just moments away. NASCAR is reviewing a new sponsorship deal after Xfinity driver Brandon Brown announced an agreement with cryptocurrency meme coin LGD Coin. The acronym reference to the anti-Biden chant, "Let's Go Brandon." Brown's team said NASCAR already gave written approval for the deal. And no longer a Buccaneer, Tampa Bay is cutting wide receiver Antonio Brown, who took off his jersey and stormed off the field Sunday. What led up to this, and what does his quarterback, Tom Brady, have to say? Got your police report coming up next. Yeah, that is a big story there. All right, it may be a new year, but the questions on COVID remain the same. How can we go about our daily lives in the face of this surging virus? Millions of Americans are set to return to classrooms and the workplaces now that the holidays are over, but tests are still difficult to come by, and case counts are breaking records every day. So it's time for 3 questions in maybe 3 minutes. Let's bring in Dr. Ali Raja, Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Raja is also a professor at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Raja, so nice to have you. Happy New Year. Good to see you back. So, kids headed back to classrooms today. It's on the minds of Christine and myself and every other parent who has a child going back to school today. What should schools do to brace themselves for what they know is going to be a potential surge in cases?
You're so right, Laura. I'm really excited about our kids going back to school today. So, first of all, I just wanted to thank the teachers and staff. They've been working so hard to make this safe for our kids. But what I've been telling my friends, who are all parents as well, if you have tests, please test your kids before sending them back this morning. And if they have symptoms and you can't get tested, please keep them home. But also, make some contingency plans. I'm really worried about schools having to go remote, not necessarily because the students are getting sick, but just like in the hospital where our doctors and nurses and other staff are getting sick, I'm worried about teachers and all the other people in the schools getting sick and having to close things down temporarily.
Yeah, we've already seen in my school some teacher shortages. I mean, one little friend of one of my sons had 3 lunch periods in a row because there weren't enough teachers actually to teach the class, which has those parents wondering, right, well, maybe I should keep my kid home. We have a virtual option that's going to begin, an optional virtual option that will begin starting Wednesday from what do you do Monday, Tuesday. So parents all over the country are sort of grappling with. If you're one of the lucky travelers, by the way, who made it home with no issues this weekend, what should you be doing now that you're back? Should you go into the office this morning? Do you stay home for safekeeping? It seems like some companies are telling everybody just stay home at least for the next couple of weeks.
Well, Virginia, it's a good question. It depends a lot on your risk of exposure and why you went on the trip, quite honestly. If you don't have any symptoms and we're taking all the necessary precautions during your trip, you should feel comfortable going back to work. There's no guidance or guidelines that says you shouldn't go back. But honestly, if you were traveling for a big New Year's Eve blowout and there was lots of unmasked people around, and you may have had an exposure and just not know it yet, you should stay home and make sure you get tested before you get back.
Well, I, for one, am glad that Christine's Rollins made it back from Chicago. I don't think she was out partying until midnight, but who knows. Some people still get sick till midnight. I don't think any of us, sorry, maybe I'm here, doctor, but I'm used to it. 9:30. Okay, so some people, doctor, I find this interesting. Some people still test positive for COVID weeks after they've had it. So how can you actually tell
if you're still infectious, if you're one of these people who you keep taking the test and it's showing positive, but maybe you don't even have any symptoms anymore, you had months ago.
Yeah, Laura, this is tough. The data on this is constantly evolving. For the most part, like the CDC saying, if you don't have symptoms 5 days out, you should be clear. Although, hopefully that'll be with a negative test. Now, like you said, you might keep testing positive. If you do, wait a full solid 10 days. And if you're asymptomatic at that point, you should be good to go. But the problem, as you said, is that very rarely some people are going to keep testing positive weeks and months later. In that case, talk to your doctor. But I can tell you, at 10 days out, if you are feeling like you don't have symptoms, you shouldn't be infectious and contagious to other people.
That's good advice. One of our friends, Laura and I have a friend who's home right now with a sick baby, and her baby has the flu. That's flu season, complicating everything. We're all worried about COVID. We're testing for COVID. She's testing for COVID, and then it's just the good old-fashioned flu, and it really knocked them out.
It absolutely does. The fact of the matter is that COVID and the flu are both really big deals, and the flu has always been a big deal. And because of the fact that right now we are in the middle of flu season, if you do get COVID, your body's immune system's going to be weakened,
You shouldn't
and your
be
lungs are
shower
going to
from
be
the
affected, and it's
people
going to
are
make you
worried
more
about the
likely
flu.
to get the flu and vice versa. So if you can get vaccinated for either or both, and that's just about everybody except for kids
Fewer
younger than
people are
5,
going to end
you
up
should.
dying from the flu because so many people have already died
All right,
from
Dr. Alvarado, it's so nice to see you.
COVID-19.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
You too. All right, a new year, and the fact is the economy roared back to life in the old year, 2021. Record new job creation, more than 6 billion jobs added back through November. Take a look. That's the best first-year performance by far of any first-term president since 1970. And economic growth overall, it's likely to shape up to be the best since the 80s, since the Reagan administration. The stock market broke records. The S&P 500 broke something like 68 record highs. Retirement accounts now have all-time high balances. Home prices also record highs and record
I don't think the
necessities.
economy is rolling back to life at all.
Totally at odds with
I heard they
public
just
polling
got
because
2
Americans
GDP.
pessimistic and questioning the economy.
Much
Why?
slower than I thought it was going to be before the
And this
Omicron
president
virus.
doesn't cheerlead the way his predecessor did. Remember every
I
time
think it's
Donald Trump
Monday
took
and
credit for stock
the
market highs? You
station
don't hear
people
that
want us to
from
think
this
it's good.
president. So what are the challenges ahead for 2022? That's what's
Usually
important here, looking forward.
people
Number one, the virus. Number two, putting the brakes on inflation. If it doesn't slow on its own, we're starting the year with inflation at a level we haven't seen in decades. Two of the most watched inflation measures both climbed to 39-year highs in November. There's several factors at work here. One is the supply chain crunch. Even though some bottlenecks have eased, some issues remain.
Probably
And as
gonna
long
be
as
a
it's
bunch
more
of people
expensive and time
getting
consuming
laid
to
off
move goods, those
since the
higher
holidays
costs will
are
likely be passed on to
over.
consumers. Rising
All the
rents
seasonal
also a
jobs
concern.
are gone,
Housing
gone
represents a
away.
big portion of what people spend money on. If rent eats up a bigger piece of your pie, you may just spend less on non-essentials. The White House says there is one way to ease this whole crunch, right? Build back better.
Food, housing, rental housing, the kind of things that can often be pressure on a family budget. Building back better relieves those costs. It eases those price pressures by helping families pay for childcare, pay for education, lower prescription drug costs. So it actually pushes the other way. It helps to ease inflationary pressures in some key areas to family budgets.
Now, what the White House can't control is COVID, specifically Omicron. If the new variant triggers new restrictions, it could once again change the way consumers spend. And help from Uncle Sam to buffer those changes is running dry. After providing nearly $6 trillion in COVID relief during the first 2 years of the pandemic, all these programs are winding down. They're either finished or they're ending soon. Other possible economic factors in the year ahead. Labor shortages that slow the recovery. What if the Federal Reserve blows it, overcorrects, cooling the economy, and risks a recession? And there's always the possibility of an unpredictable geopolitical event threatening global stability. Think Russia, China, Iran, which could jack up oil prices and tank the stock market. All these things to worry about. But look, last year was a very big year in the economic recovery. And I find it such a contradiction, a COVID contradiction in the Biden economy that so many Americans just don't believe it.
But you're so right in terms of sort of the messaging and the bragging rights, if you will. This president just doesn't
Just to be his style. And it wouldn't be too, it wouldn't fit either. So that complicates the messaging, I think.
All right, we head out west now as recovery efforts continue in Colorado.
One of 3 people missing from that Marshall fire has now been accounted for. Residents are slowly coming to grips with their new reality after hurricane-force winds pushed those devastating wildfires across the Boulder area. About half a foot of snow now covers homes, complicating recovery efforts. Look at that. CNN's Natasha Chen is on the ground in Superior, Colorado. Christina Laura, 2 people are still missing. 1 woman from Superior and 1 man from the Marshall area. The Boulder County Sheriff says the process to look for them in the burn zone is a difficult task, especially given the extensive debris and destruction. Houses reduced to ashes, now covered in about 8 inches of snow in some places. Officials also point out that 2 missing people out of 35,000 evacuees is quite extraordinary. At the same time, investigators are working with experts and partners, including the FBI, to look into how this fire started. A search warrant was executed on Friday on private property, but the sheriff would not go into details about the ongoing investigation. The winds reached over 100 miles per hour, carrying flames through neighborhoods so fast, about 1,000 structures, mostly homes, were destroyed. We talked to people who lost everything they owned. One family told us they had just minutes to grab their cell phones, dogs, and medication. A Boulder County commissioner says he had to make a similar escape. Luckily, his house is okay, but he described being at a lookout point with winds so strong nearly knocking him over and realizing it was time to go.
I went back to the car, started driving home, got a message from my wife that we had an evacuation order. In the meantime, I've been told by staff that I need to do an emergency declaration. So as I was trying to collect the papers that I would need to get out, the legal papers and all the things, the pictures there, I had to sign an emergency declaration too.
I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to get it out. I just felt like a punch to the stomach, and this can't be real.
Many streets are still closed, and hot spots are still being managed. So reopening subdivisions, allowing people to go back and look at their homes, has been a slow process. Christina Mora, back to you.
Natasha Chen, thank you so much. That's such a beautiful part of the state there.
All right, dozens of inmates and workers at a Baltimore jail were treated for smoking relations. Officials claim that fellow inmates intentionally set fires inside the facility. A Baltimore fire spokesperson said an immense amount of smoke then spread before ventilation. Not clear how the inmates lit the fires or what charges they could potentially face. We'll be right back.
This holiday
was predicted to fall. Howard Corkin opened that. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean joins us live with the Fox weather forecast, and this is the first time we can wish the lovely JD a happy New Year. Happy New Year weather machine.
I love it. I love it. Hi, Kevin. Hello, my friend. Both of you. It's nice to see you. Todd. Hi, Todd. You know what? For a split second in the new year, I forgot your name. Forgive me. Forgive me, please. Oh, my goodness. I'm still sleeping. But hi to your mom and hi to your dad. How about that? And Kevin, it's nice to see you. Yes, we are getting our first official snowstorm of the year across D.C. Even could see some snowflakes from parts of northern Georgia up towards the mid-Atlantic region, including New Jersey and D.C., where you know that a couple of inches of snow will shut that city down. It's cold as far south as coastal Texas in through Louisiana, Mississippi, and even Alabama. We've got temperatures below freezing. And there's our mid-Atlantic storm system. We also have another storm moving into the west, our first official big snowstorm of the season. And here we go. So we could see the potential for an icy mix for parts of the Delmarva here. And then where we see the temperature below freezing, that's where we're going to see the snow. It is a quick-moving storm system. It is going to be out of here by this afternoon and this evening, but it will bring the potential for shutting things down across areas that don't typically see this amount of snow in a short period of time. So winter weather advisories from northern Georgia all the way up towards Atlantic Lake City, and there's a future track, so we'll be out of here by this afternoon, but it will bring some measurable snow totals for parts of the Mid-South up towards the Mid-Atlantic. There's your forecast today, so quick moving storm for those areas that I just mentioned. The D.C. area could get several inches of storm totals, and then we also have our next system moving into the west. Also want to point out our first big Arctic plunge of the season is going to move towards the south and the Mid-Atlantic this week. That will set us up for perhaps another storm system later this week, which we will have to track, and perhaps we'll get some measurable snowfall totals for the Northeast. But look at the frost and freeze advisories for the Gulf Coast already this morning, where temperatures are below freezing. So this is quite an event to see the cold temperatures as far south as the Gulf Coast. And then, of course, that snowstorm that is developing across the Mid-Atlantic. The higher elevations, that's where we're going to get the highest snowfall totals, but it will be a quick mover. But it is going to cause some crippling delays, especially around the D.C. area. Todd, I'm so sorry, my friend. I love you. You know that. Kevin, it's nice to see you. Mwah, Happy New Year.
Mwah, Happy New Year. Great to see you, Janice Dean. Real pleasure. We'll see you again in just a few minutes. Meantime, the flight fair continues, Todd, as thousands of flights are already canceled today on top of the thousands of others that were actually wiped out over the holiday weekend. Chuck Sonny breaking down that story for you next.
Some of my best memories growing up were cooking for Mom. She always said, food is love. So when she moved in with us, the new kitchen became part of our financial plan.
Should Russia invade Ukraine? CNN Nick Robertson live in Moscow with more here. This telephone call
it's funny, I really like watching the live news.
What President Biden is suggesting the U.S. and its allies
I think I was raised in journalism. My dad got me into journalism as a kid, and I used to watch the news and analyze it and talk about it.
Sanctions,
I
energy industry sanctions. What are they? Are there
so I like the stories and the whole thing.
They're not
but
saying
there's some parts of it I
specifics
really don't
publicly
like
because
too.
that's the idea of these sanctions, I guess, to keep President Putin guessing to a degree, but there's also a military component to what would happen as well if Russia invaded Ukraine, and that is to ramp up NATO troops on the eastern borders of Europe, and that is exactly what President Putin wants to avoid. He wants NATO to roll back its presence in eastern Europe, which he considers his western border. You know, I think we'd be good to see an element of how these U.S.-Russian talks could go when the representatives sit down a week from now in Geneva. And that came in the White House's readout for the call with President Zelensky of Ukraine. The Ukrainian president, of course, grateful for that strong support from the United States, saying that it was important to de-escalate, working with European and U.S. partners to keep Europe safe, were his words. But what the White House is saying, it appears to Ukraine, is you need to do some sort of confidence-building measures, specifically engage in active diplomacy to implement the Minsk II agreement. And that is going to be something difficult for Ukraine to do. This is the agreement that was designed to bring peace to the east of Ukraine following the Russian-backed separatists rising and continuing confrontation with the Ukrainian government and trying to secede from Ukraine as a whole. And that is going to be a point of pressure from the United States on Ukraine, but an area where President Putin might be looking to make some long-term gains.
Any response from the Russians on this telephone call, the U.S. vowing that the U.S. and its allies would do something?
So far, nothing specific on that. We do know that the Russians are saying that they're not going to allow these talks in Geneva to drag on, that they want rapid results. That seems to be, not about to happen, but as yet, the Russian position is they're not about to invade Ukraine, so it's the U.S., NATO that's in the wrong here, not the Russians.
Yeah, the aggressor, the U.S. and NATO, from their perspective. All right. Nick Robertson, so nice to see you this morning. Happy New Year.
Now to this, a network major news outlet in Hong Kong is announcing it's shutting down. Let's get right to CNN's Ivan Watson live for us in Hong Kong this morning. Ivan, there's been this aggressive crackdown on news outlets that we've seen. So is this shutdown a preemptive strike of sorts to avoid the kind of raids we saw last week?
Absolutely. I mean, the Facebook post that this outlet, Citizen News, put out says, "Thank you and so long," in big letters. But then it goes on to explain, hey, 5 years after this news site launched with some veteran Hong Kong journalists, it is closing down out of the safety of its team. Take a listen to what further one of the news organization's writers had to say.
Overall, media is facing an increasingly tough environment. And for those who are being seen as critical for troublemakers, they are all so this is what we are facing, and that's why we made the decision.
So the difficult environment he's talking about, this is the third news organization to shut down in Hong Kong in 6 months. Apple Daily was this big tabloid newspaper that challenged and criticized the government, and it was raided by police, and publisher and top editors arrested, sentenced on different charges, millions of dollars in its assets frozen. I watched the printing presses go dark for the very last time there. And then just last week, police raided another independent online pro-democracy news outlet, Stand News, arrested at least 7 people, seized its assets. And what we're seeing here is one of the last remaining voices saying, we don't want to take that risk, we're going to close down. The government insists its raids are simply following through on police work when it accuses journalists of sedition and national security threats. But I think the writing's on the wall for what's really happening here, Kristen.
All right, Adam Watson, thank you so much for your reporting as usual. Back here at home, at least one less headache when it comes to your health care. The days of surprise medical bills are supposed to be over. The no surprise medical bill law protects patients who receive emergency care or treatment from doctors and hospitals that they did not choose, and importantly here, that are not in their insurance networks. There are roughly 10 million claims of surprise bills every year, Christine. All right, looking at markets around the world on the first trading day of 2022, Asian shares mixed. Europe has opened mixed, but Paris is up, so is Frankfurt. And on Wall Street, stock index futures to start 2022 are leaning higher here. Look, stocks ended slightly lower Friday, but the year 2021, a banner year for Wall Street. Double-digit gains for the year. The S&P 500 alone rose 27%. 70 different record highs. That's the second most new highs ever, Laura. All right, wide receiver Antonio Brown's days as a Buccaneer are over after he left the field in the middle of the game. Andy Scholes had this morning's Bleach Report. Andy, this is crazy.
It is, Laura. I don't think we've ever seen a really good player quit on his team mid-game and leave the field and likely end his career in the process. But that's what Antonio Brown did yesterday. Happened in the third quarter against the Jets. Mike Evans was pleading with Brown to try to calm him down. But Brown pulled off his jersey and pads and threw his shirt and gloves in the crowd before waving to the crowd on his way to the tunnel. Bucs head coach Bruce Arians told Fox Sports' Jay Glazer he was trying to get Brown to go into the game, but Brown refused twice. So Arians told him to, quote, get out after the game. Arians said Brown has been dismissed from the team.
He is no longer a player. That's the end of the story. Let's talk about the guys who are not no longer playing.
We all love him. We care about him deeply. We want to see him be his best. And, unfortunately, won't be with our team. I think the most important thing about football is relationships with your friends and your teammates, and they go beyond the field. And, I think everyone should be very compassionate and empathetic toward, some very difficult things that are happening.
Now, Brown did not fly home with the team, but he did post on Instagram multiple times. One of the posts saying, thanks for the opportunity. Now, this was Brown's second game back from his 3-game suspension for misrepresenting his COVID-19 vaccination status. And despite all the drama with Brown, the Bucs ended up not needing him to come back to the 14-point deficit. Tom Brady engineering a 93-yard drive in the final minutes, connected with Cyril Grayson, who's elevated from the practice squad. 33-yard touchdown there with 15 seconds left in the game was good enough to get the win. That was Brady's third touchdown in the game, 40th of the season. Bucs, nice comeback there. 24-20 was 28-24 final. All right, Packers meanwhile can have home field advantage throughout throughout the NFC playoffs. Green Bay wrapping up the #1 seed with a 37-10 win over the Vikings at frigid Lambeau Field last night. Temperature 11 degrees, a wind chill of 1 just before kickoff. Aaron Rodgers making his case that he should be the MVP for a second straight season. Threw 2 more touchdown passes in the last 6 games. Rodgers threw 18 touchdown passes without an interception. All right, finally, we had a scary scene after the Eagles beat Washington at FedEx Field, D.C. yesterday. Watch the left side of the screen. Philly quarterback Jalen Hurts walking off the field. The fans trying to get a high five and the rail gives way. Several fans falling to the ground. It appears Joel was injured. Many of them popped right up to try to get a picture with Hurts, and Hurts helped them up with all smiles, taking some pictures.
I'm just happy everybody's safe from it. Happy everybody's safe from it. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff right there. That's a dangerous situation. I'm just so happy everybody bounced back from it. It seemed like it. Passionate Eagles fans. I love it.
Yeah, and more. FedEx Field started the season with a pipe bursting and water falling all over the fans, and now it ends the season with a railing falling. And, it could have been a bad situation. Luckily, everyone was okay. A lot of those fans there in Washington, they want a new stadium, and it looks like they need it.
Yeah, they need it badly. How scary. Right, glad everyone's okay. Thanks, Andy. All right, more sort of sports this morning. This morning, a sharp-eyed hockey fan saves a man's life. Nadia Popovici was sitting at a Vancouver Canucks game when she noticed an oddly shaped mole on the back of a man's neck. So she banged on the plexiglass and held up a note on her phone to catch his attention, warning the mole could be cancerous. Canucks assistant equipment manager Red Hamilton says he initially brushed it off, but later, he had the team doctor check it out and discovered it was a malignant melanoma.
She needs to know her efforts were valid and bang on, and I'm happy that story's there, but not for me, but for her, because the world needs to know that she's this woman exists. She's a hero, and we need to celebrate her and people like her.
The Canucks are also awarding Popovici a $10,000 scholarship. She starts medical school next year.
That is just incredible. How did she spot it? And that she was even paying attention to some random hole on somebody's neck. I think that's amazing.
So that's awesome. Yeah, see people like her. Absolutely. All right, thanks for joining us this first training day, but first our first day back here for 2022. I'm Christine Romans.
All right, I'm Laura Jerry. 2 days.
The more we use our products, the more network quality they provide to the matter. And Illegal Risings denies the proof for network quality 27 times in a row.
Here in a second. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier in the show, President Biden returns to the White House for this holiday break in Delaware. We're going to hear from him today a little bit more about supply chain and economic issues, and then tomorrow we will hear from him about COVID. He's meeting with his team. We expect, as Dr. Fauci mentioned yesterday, perhaps some changes to the CDC guidelines, which have drawn a lot of scrutiny in recent days, particularly about how it didn't distinguish between vaccinated and unvaccinated and not requiring a negative to end isolation. Speaking of COVID, we've got Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, who says he's preparing to see a huge rise in COVID cases and hospitalizations in the coming months. Speaking yesterday, he was asked if the state was doing enough to combat the surge.
We've been talking about this for nearly a month and preparing for it, but you can't really manufacture doctors in our system that don't exist. And frankly, these heroes on the front line that have been working so hard for 2 years, that are fatigued, that are people who are working in hospitals that are coming down and being infected, so we're taking all kinds of actions.
Hogan's comments came after the Republican governor tested positive for COVID, despite having both shots of the vaccine as well as a booster dose. Hogan, of course, where Republican was stood up last year to President Trump's coronavirus response, openly critical of the White House, saying it wasn't doing enough to provide testing. He went on, in fact, helped secure tests on his own for the state from South Korea. And he is someone who is rumored potentially as a GOP challenger for 2024, even if Trump runs. Not clear the field entirely. Meanwhile, 2 people are missing and feared dead after a devastating wildfire in Colorado last week. Officials say close to 1,000 homes were destroyed when the fire broke out in the Boulder County suburbs on Thursday. Local authorities have provided few details about the cause, but did confirm that they executed a search warrant over the weekend related to the fire. The area was also blanketed with more than a foot of snow on Saturday, complicating an effort to determine the cause.
For many, it seems like a surreal experience. Just a few days ago, they were celebrating Christmas at home and hanging their stockings, and now a home and park have been destroyed. It's a shock. And the reality of it just hasn't even set in for so many folks who lost everything, and for those who still aren't able to return homes. But I want the community to know we're not alone. Full force of the United States of America is here.
We're still very much doing this show during a pandemic, and obviously a lot of our guests are joining us remotely. Apologies for the technical issues there, but this is the way we live now. Most importantly, everyone, please stay safe. Thanks to all of you for getting up way too early with us on this Monday morning. Morning Joe starts right now. Don't go anywhere.
Keep this to an hour. Take it easy. Good luck.
That is.
Take a turn.